Some leaders leave footprints, others leave libraries. You're tuning into the Authors on Mission podcast, where industry giants become literacy legends. In every episode, we talk with authors who turn their brilliance into books that transform lives. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Welcome to your authorship experience. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Authors on Mission podcast, where we explore approaches to leadership and decision-making in the writing process. Today, we're joined by Jennifer Riel, partner at IDEO and co-author of Creating Great Choices. Jennifer has spent years helping leaders move through and beyond their thinking to create superior solutions to complex problems. Through her work with Roger Martin and the Rotman School of Management, she's developed practical tools for integrative thinking that anyone can use. And today we're going to explore how to make better choices in our lives and also in the writing process. So without further ado, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today on Authors on Mission.
It's my pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Honestly, it's a pleasure to be able to talk to you. I looked through your book and your work, and I just have to say I'm very impressed. You've done a lot of things, and I think our listeners here are in for a very good treat today.
Thank you.
So, I know that you transitioned. You were a copywriter. You became a thought leader from all of that. I guess I'm curious. Can you perhaps just give a little bit of a rundown to all of our listeners today who might not know a little bit about your background and just an overview of your journey and how you became where you are today?
So I have an undergrad degree in the liberal arts. It's an English literature and history degree. And when I graduated, really didn't have any idea what I was going to do with that degree. I took it because I liked to read and liked history. And so follow your passions, I guess, was my idea. Eventually, I figured out that because I had written so much in terms of getting through my degree, and I had a natural aptitude for writing, that I could be a copywriter. And I actually started out as an editor and a copywriter, first at a small nonprofit and then at a large retailer, and quite enjoyed it. It was a pretty junior role. I was doing like catalog copywriting, and then my department was outsourced and I went to work for a studio, and that studio was a bit of a content factory. I did not enjoy working there. There wasn't a lot of purpose or meaning or care in that context. So I decided to go get an MBA because I thought that would give me a little more leverage in terms of being in the room to make decisions as opposed to having those decisions made for me. And my intention when I did that was to go back out and get a marketing job. That was the plan. But I went to the Rotman School of Management here in Toronto, met the person who was then the dean of the Rotman School, Roger Martin, and he asked me to stay after my MBA and work with him for a year to help take this pretty nascent idea of integrative thinking, a creative problem-solving tool he had been noodling with for the previous few years, and make it more teachable. And so I agreed to do that and thought I really would stay for a year and then go get a job at Procter & Gamble or Canadian Tire or I don't know where, somewhere. Great. And then really ended up staying and working with Roger, not just on teaching, but on writing, and helped edit and co-write a number of books around strategy, creative problem solving, design, and innovation. And then towards the end of our time together, we collaborated on Creating Great Choices, which is really a book about the work we did on the idea of integrative thinking and how people can use it to solve problems that they are struggling with in their work.
I love that you shared all of that with us, because I think a lot of our listeners today are also people who love to write and love to read. And I think it's inspiring that, you went for your degree and hoped to get sort of a position in this field. And even when you didn't like it, I love that you also mentioned it was a content factory, that first job you had. Like, there's no passion in it, you're just going for it, but you found your niche by working with Roger. And because of that, you're able to now have, such a acclaimed position where, you're able to inspire and lead and help people all over the place just because of that. So it's great that you didn't give up on that. You went with your passion for writing and you didn't know where it was going to lead you. You weren't even expecting to last over a year. And then, I mean, here you are today. It's amazing. Did you ever like consider like changing after that? Or do you just know like now that I've done this, this is my place?
I wish that I could say that I had a great deal of conscious intention. I think that I have always chosen my jobs based on, does it seem like an interesting place to work? And largely, once I was in a position to be more choiceful, was it a person I wanted to work with? So the person who would be my boss, is that someone I was interested in working with? And so I was interested in working with Roger. He was a brilliant thought leader. I felt I could learn a lot from him. I didn't know what the job would be. I didn't know where it would go, but let's give it a try and see. And then when it was time for a change after, almost 15 years of working together, in our work together, I met Tim Brown and the folks at IDEO. I think of IDEO as one of the great design and innovation firms in the world. I had a great, deep opportunity to learn about strategy, and the idea of exploring strategy and design together was really interesting. And I think Tim is another brilliant, great thought leader in the world of design. The idea of working with Tim was really compelling. And so decided that would be my next step, would be to leave the university and go to work for IDEO.
Understood. Okay. So what differences do you see between both of the university and IDEO? I mean, is it a lot different working from metacognition and all of that with Roger as opposed to their bosses now at IDEO? Is it completely different, or how would you describe that change?
Yeah, it is hard to imagine two more different contexts.
Okay.
So I worked at a business school, and on one level, there are similarities. There's a passion around ideas and around problem solving. But really, within a university, is a lot of individual time. Even if you're collaborating on research or working together, there is a lot of sort of quiet in your office doing work, individual heads down. I also worked at a very large public university, and so there was a reasonable amount of bureaucracy and structure and systems, all for good reason, right? They're stewards of public dollars, but it's a bit slow and a bit traditional in terms of the way that it does its work. And I really enjoyed that. I thought, having the ability to contemplate, think, build, create theories, write about them, roll ideas, and then, yes, collaborate with other people, engage with other people who were interested in similar ideas was wonderful. But then IDEO is the most collaborative, group-oriented, creative, non-structured organization I could almost imagine in the world. I'm sure there are some that are even more decentralized than we are, but very little work at IDEO happens individually. There are no offices where you go and shut the door and contemplate all on your own. It really is this petri dish of lots of different people with lots of different ideas coming together to create something bigger than themselves. And then, of course, it's not exploration of ideas for its own sake. There are clients, paying clients who have a problem they want us to solve and care deeply about. And so the incentives and the structures are quite different versus I'm taking ideas, pushing them forward, sharing them with the world, teaching them to students versus, hey, I'm solving a real problem for a paying client and it's something they care very deeply about. And so the similarities in terms of caring about problems, caring about creativity, caring about ideas, really, that's there. But everything else is almost completely opposite.
So I guess what I have to say is that as you started to talk about IDEO, like your tone and your mannerisms just brightened up. Like your whole face, you're smiling, you're shining. And I guess that just goes to show how much you really are passionate about this over the university work. I mean, I'm sure you had a lot of interesting discussions and insights while you're at the university, but this is actually what your true passion is, then I guess we could say, because you're really driving real change here as opposed to back there where I guess it would have been more slow paced is what I would assume, right? Whereas as opposed to here, you're implementing and helping your clients on a day-to-day basis. Would that be correct in assuming?
I mean,
Or
There were
maybe I'm
things
off base.
there were things I absolutely loved about working at the university. The students were a source of great energy. I would say it was a slower pace, it was more contemplative, and it was more individual. I think IDEO is just a infuriating and joyful and amazing and crazy place. And so I think that it is where I am now. It's a place that I care deeply about and always will, whether I stay there for a long time or a short time. But there is something really significant about the people I work with and the work that we do that gives me energy and gets me excited.
I love that. I mean, they say you don't work a day in your life if you love what you're doing. And of course, the people that you work with too, I can tell that again, it's something you love doing and it's something that truly just resonates with you. So it's amazing. But I'm going to actually just tie us back a little bit to creating great choices because, our listeners here want to know about the writing process and what that was like. And I think what's unique also about your story is that you weren't just an author of the book by yourself. You were a co-author, which is something I think that we could really dive into here because, for example, you said that Roger came up to you with the idea for this. So it must have been interesting to kind of take that idea and run with it and bring it to life. So can you tell us a little bit, what was it like to be a co-author as opposed to a normal author?
Yeah, so that it's a journey. I think that integrative thinking as an idea is something that Roger had formulated before he met me. And he'd actually already almost finished a book called The Opposable Mind, a great book, in my opinion, about what integrative thinking is. And then my job when I joined him, I helped a little bit as he was finishing that book, but it really was about saying, okay, if there's this idea of integrative thinking, which put simply is how can you leverage the tension between opposing ideas to help you solve a problem that seems unsolvable? So I feel really torn in a context of an either or choice. I don't love either answer, or I wish I didn't have to choose. Integrative thinking is this idea that you could use that tension, use that feeling to generate a better answer. So Roger had this theory that that's what highly successful leaders did. He had some examples of folks like Isidore Sharp, the founder of the Four Seasons, and A.G. Lafley, who's the past CEO of Procter & Gamble, folks who had done this in their career. What he didn't have was a methodology, a way you actually could do that if you didn't already know, if it wasn't something that came naturally to you, and certainly not a methodology that you could use collaboratively, a methodology you could use in groups to solve problems. So really, Roger and I spent a good 5 years at the beginning of our working together figuring out what that repeatable methodology could be. How could groups of people take a problem that really mattered to them, that felt hard to solve, and go through some steps to think differently about that problem, to leverage opposing perspectives and come to a new answer. We really spent 5 years building that theory and then another few years teaching it and honing and refining. So by the time we decided we wanted to write the book, Creating Great Choices, which was really, how does an individual go about doing integrative thinking, we had a really long period of having worked collaboratively on the development of the theory and the process and the tools and of teaching together. So it came quite naturally then to say, let's sketch out together an outline of what we think this book is. And then in this case, I tended to do sort of the first draft, and then Roger would edit, and then I would edit, and it was a very back and forth kind of an approach. We did all of our interviews of the folks in the book together and sort of discussed and said, what do we think are the most important points? And then turned that into first a very rough draft, and then a slightly better draft, and then a slightly better draft. So it was very iterative, and writing is really hard. Rewriting is lots easier. And so get it down on paper. It's going to be bad. That's fine. At least now it's on paper and you can make it better, was the approach that we took.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like the number one tip for writing, right? Like, I just get your ideas out there, start writing it. It's a famous Hemingway quote, I
Yeah.
believe, like write drunk, edit sober, and just get it out there, and then you can work on it later on. But
For
like,
the record, I
what's
did not write drunk, just for the record. I did not
for the
follow Hemingway.
record, right?
I think Hemingway
I
was a
mean,
great writer, but very little of his life advice is applicable to most of us,
it is
particularly when
true,
it
but
comes to
also
drink.
funny enough, people are debating if that's actually a Hemingway quote or not, I've heard. So there's a whole nother thing, but I feel like in my mind, I'm always going to just reference it to him until we find out who actually wrote that. But maybe
It's
that's a whole nother
plausible.
side note.
It's plausible. He,
um,
he he lived his life that way, even if he didn't say it. So there you go.
right. That's maybe why people think that, or at least that's how he wrote. Um, but okay, so what I guess I want to kind of go back to then is it's interesting because a lot of authors and everybody listening today, if they wrote a book, it was most likely about something they knew about deeply, right? Like, for example, a podcast guest I had recently wrote a book about his experiences abroad, and because he lived that and he knew it and he knew all about it, that's how he got his content out. However, with you and Roger, you didn't have those experiences where you were problem solving at the higher level. I mean, you have, for example, but the case studies he was referencing were very successful people who, he didn't actually have, you didn't have the methodology to begin with. So you kind of went backwards a little bit. So I guess I'm curious, you spent 5 years finding out what that process was. What were some of the challenges that you faced in doing so? I mean, you conducted interviews, sure, but I'm sure there was probably some studies as well. And tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think the challenges are multiple, right? Originally, when Roger developed the theory of integrative thinking and then got interviews and stories to illustrate what it meant, there was certainly some critique that he was cherry picking. Like he didn't do academic research in the sense of performing uh, double blind controlled studies of problem solving, studying people's brains in MRIs, because that's not his background. He's a management consultant, he's not a cognitive scientist. And so we just had to embrace the fact that this was going to be an empirical approach where we tried things and saw what worked. We experimented with students, giving them challenges and giving them tools to solve them and seeing what worked and what didn't work. I think another challenge was the acknowledgement that context matters. And so there are often people who, when you share an example of someone who used this, they will say, well, that's all well and good for A.G. Lafley, this super successful, really important leader of this massive company. That's not me. That's not the problem I face. I'm in the middle of the organization. I can't just tell people what to do. And so there was sometimes challenge or pushback that the theory might not be broadly applicable because the original stories were very much about very senior leaders and CEOs. And so it became very important to us to make sure that students were trying it on problems they really faced and small groups. And we even had examples where high school students were using it to tackle problems in their community to see if they could make progress. And as we did that, and as we experimented and pushed on different tools they could use to make their way through the process, we gained a lot more confidence that one, this was a skill worth honing, and two, that there were tools and there were steps that individuals could use, even if their brain wasn't naturally inclined to do this, even if it didn't come instinctively, that there were these things that we could teach them that would help them through this problem solving process. And then when it came time to write the book, we tried to think about what was an array of examples that would help people understand. Because I think another great truism of writing is, there's theory and there is illustration, and it is the illustration that human beings take in and remember very, very often. But it is in the pairing that the real power happens. So theory plus illustration is much stickier than either one alone. And so it was important to us to figure out what are the examples that feel big, interesting, meaty, relatable, but diverse enough that people can see themselves in it.
I think all of those are very important tips for our listeners to hear right now because, I mean, a lot of them are business leaders, entrepreneurs, and they they have these complex ideas, but you're right. I mean, how can it appeal to the general audience if you're really just focusing on one category, or even just, language-wise, speaking in a way that wouldn't resonate with somebody else? You need to make it accessible to a wide audience in order for your book to have the widespread reach like yours did. So I guess it's also funny that I kind of wanted to ask you this. You mentioned you used the students for your research. Were they given the option to, or you kind of just said,
Oh,
like,
sure.
all right, we're here. Oh yeah.
Sure.
I'm
No,
just like, we're at the university. All right, you're in this class. Problem solve this for your assignment.
yeah, we didn't experiment on them, to be clear. There was no Stanford prison experiment here. No, we would say, here are the tools. Go apply them to a problem you care about. Tell us how it goes. Give us the answer. So they were choosing to take this course and choosing to do this work and sharing with us the outcome of that. And so it was proof of concept or application and learning from that application that we were really focused on.
Understood. I had a feeling it was probably something they were, aware of. I just, for some reason, was thinking, like, this would be really funny if a professor was like, you know what, I have a whole, like, test lab of subjects here. Let me just see if they can solve these problems in the class, or...
It was nothing like that. It was nothing.
Understood. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's great that you took all of that and you also just applied it and were able to kind of find ways to make it more towards the audience. You mentioned there was a big challenge to before, like, middle managers might not be able to apply the same concept. So I think it's great that you were able to sort of work around that problem through your strategies and make it more broad. And again, the other thing that is very important here too is what you mentioned, the illustrations, which is something I usually don't discuss too much on this podcast because sometimes there isn't that many illustrations in a book. So can you tell me a little bit about the sort of things that you had to think about as you were adding those in? I know you said that really matters what the audience is going to remember is the illustrations. What process did you take to decide those?
So we thought about, what were the points that we were trying to make, and what stories or examples did we know that we thought would demonstrate those well. Asked for interviews with those subjects and said, okay, we think that Jack Bogle, who was the founder of Vanguard, is a really great example of someone who created tremendous value in the world through an insight actually very, very early in his career. Or, Tennis Canada, very, very different context, right? Big finance, investing versus, little grassroots organization that's about getting kids to love playing tennis. We wanted stories that we thought demonstrated real impact, stories of people we thought really did demonstrate the power of these tools, and then diverse enough that if you're like, I don't know, high finance, Vanguard, that isn't really something that I get excited about. You might say, oh, well, the story of the Toronto International Film Festival, that's more my thing. So the idea was to get a broad array of kinds of examples in the belief that then people could find themselves or get excited about a particular story. And then, we sort of said, well, what is the story that we think is the most broadly understandable or applicable that we could start the book with, because that felt important. And so we started the book with Lego and the Lego movie, because we felt, that is an example from the world that feels enormously accessible for people, right? You know what Lego is. Millions of people saw the Lego movie. And so being able to share a story about how their CEO overcame what felt like a really difficult either or choice to result in this massive success for Lego, that felt like a really great place to begin the book.
Can you tell our listeners right now, what exactly is the story that we're talking about here? So give us all the details.
Yeah, so Lego, of course, most people know the little plastic bricks, and that is in fact all Lego makes. They don't have a million other toys. They make little plastic bricks. That's what they do. And their family in Denmark have made these little plastic bricks for 100 years. There was a diversification of their business that came when entertainment companies came to them and said, we love the little minifigures and there's a lot of character to them. We would love to do a video game that's like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, but in Lego world. So an Indiana Jones Lego figure in Lego world. And there was a huge amount of revenue that came from those creative content partnerships. Other people owned the creative and the content. Lego gave them licensing and permission to use sort of the Lego world and the Lego equity in the Lego brand. So, of course, before long, someone at Lego says, well, a lot of the money is actually going to the creators of the content. What if we created our own Lego content? And they tried it. They created a movie called The Adventures of Clutch Powers. No one's ever heard of it. It's not good. Because it's incredibly earnest and true to the brand and inoffensive. It's kind of corporate. And it was not a success. It was really hard on the people at Lego to see that really not succeed when they're a company that has such a powerful brand. And so when a big entertainment company came and said, we'd like to create a true Lego movie, new characters, new equities, not based on an existing brand, we'd love to do that. The folks at Lego were pretty nervous about how to do two things at one time. One, ensure it's a good movie. The last one was bad. How do we ensure it's a good movie? And two, how do we protect the Lego brand in doing that? Because there's a real tension around the ownership of the creative content. So to get a really good movie, the overriding belief, the principle is you have to give creative control to the creative people. You have to let the people who are making the movie tell the story without constraint, without a bunch of lawyers looking over their shoulder telling them you can't say that and you can't make the CEO the bad guy, and you need to give them free rein. But that is the other perspective is you need to have that oversight. You need to have that control, because otherwise you're putting the most important thing in your company, your brand, in someone else's hands. And so the leadership at the time were faced with this choice of, if we do decide to go into partnership on this movie, are we going to give all the creative control to the filmmakers and hope for the best? Or are we going to try to insist that we have creative control, but know that it's then really hard to get great people to want to make that movie? And the answer that they came to was ultimately to say, it's not choosing one or the other. It's exploring how to ensure that the people who have the creative control, the filmmakers who have creative control, also care about protecting our brand. And what they did was recognize that there was nothing that Lego as a company could do or lawyers could do to make these filmmakers care about or committed to protecting the Lego brand. So instead what they did was say, you have full creative control under one condition. Before you write anything, before you start producing this movie, you have to come and spend time with, not us, not the owners or the leaders of Lego, but with Lego's most important stakeholders, which are children, the kids who love Lego. And their belief was, if they had these filmmakers really spend meaningful time with the children who absolutely adore Lego, they would fall in love with Lego through the kids' eyes and would get to a place where there was nothing they would want to do to hurt these kids or to hurt the thing they loved. And so it aligned their interest in a way that didn't require a million lawyers and a bunch of script checks and all of those things. It was about seeing the problem in a new way and finding an answer that they didn't have coming in.
Well, it's definitely an amazing example of that integrative thinking that the whole book is about. I mean, thank you so much for going into details about that and really laying that out for our listeners, because I think, without that, they wouldn't have quite understood, one, the case study, but also the main concept of what we're talking about here. And I think that just goes to show that, the power of having a great story to start your book, or even to start each chapter of your book. I say this all the time in my podcast. It's so important to have those stories that our listeners or readers could resonate with and, really, take that and apply it to their own lives, because hey, everybody loves Lakers, like you just said, and that's a problem that they could really see in the real world, and they saw it played out for themselves on the big screen. So amazing ideas thinking of that one. I mean, how did that even come to mind? I guess, just maybe you saw it on the theaters one day and you're like, how did they come up with this? Or did you know that that's how the process went? I'm just curious how
Well,
you found out about that story.
my co-author Roger Martin, as I said, was a management consultant before he became
Mm,
dean. And even when he was dean, he had a few clients that he would be advisor to their C-suite or their CEO. And so he actually knew the CEO of Lego and knew a bit about this story and really thought it would be a good example. And so then we reached out and said, hey, can we interview you? Can we get more of the details of this story? And he was happy to. And so, we had a bit of an inside line on the idea that this might be an interesting story for us to use.
yeah, I mean that's great that he had the inside connection there. I guess the reason I asked that is because potentially a lot of our listeners might not have, these ideas right at the get-go. Like they're not sure like how to start their stories or what kind of case studies would be most relevant. I mean, I've worked with authors who, they'll give me a draft of their manuscript and then some of the examples they're throwing in there, like, this doesn't even prove your point. It's actually contradicting your point. You know what I mean? So it's interesting to think about how you're able to come up with that. And I guess in a way, that's also a problem that could be solved by using the tips in your book, which is potentially a good segue to ask you this question now. I mean, you mentioned the framework to follow these steps. What are some of these steps that perhaps, I mean, maybe we need to find the book to know what these steps are, but can you share at least, maybe one with them with our listeners today that they can kind of apply to their own lives right after show?
So, as we say, the beginning is about creating tension between opposing ideas. And
Mm,
so, what we will do is say, let's imagine you're trying to think about how to structure something in your organization. And the tension is there are a bunch of people who think that it needs to be centralized in order to have control and structure and to contain costs. And then there are a bunch of people who are saying, no, 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 no. It needs to be decentralized. It needs to be out in the world and close to the customer and in the market. And you can imagine that an organization could spend a lot of time just arguing with each other.
mm,
Here's why I believe that it should be centralized. Well, here's why I believe it should be decentralized. And just making it personal and getting frustrated and trying to sort of push and push and push their way through. And so integrative thinking says neither of those is likely the right answer. What we really want to do is understand the benefits, the true benefits that making each choice would create, and see if there is a way to get the benefits we most care about by making or creating a new choice. So what we say is you want to say, all right, what if we took a totally centralized approach to this or a totally decentralized approach to this? And you want your team not to argue what's good or bad about those approaches, but instead, collectively, to fall in love with the idea of centralizing it all. What would be amazing, great, brilliant for us, for our customers, for our employees? What would be amazing about centralizing this? Okay. Now, what would be amazing, brilliant, fantastic for our most important stakeholders about decentralizing it? Now, what do we truly, as we look at those benefits, what do we actually care about? What do we want to take forward and bring into a new and better answer? Because at a high level, should we be centralized or decentralized? It doesn't feel like there's much room for a better answer. It's an either or. We're going to do one, or we're going to do the other, or we're going to find some slightly sad compromise where we're like just centralized enough that people don't freak out, but it doesn't actually feel like a great answer. Instead, what we want to say is, all right, well, if what we care about from centralization is that there is aligned action, and what we care about from decentralization is the ability to adapt to context. Okay, what is the solution that allows us to align on the things that most matter, that are most core, but still create space for us to adjust it to the specific context that we're in? What could we do? What could we imagine doing? So really that first step of integrative thinking is creating the opposing models and seeking to fall in love with them, understand the benefits. And then as you go through the other steps of integrative thinking, it's about questioning and exploring, generating possibilities for a better answer, and then testing them.
Well, I like that you said that because I think that's something that ends up being a huge problem, like a barrier to problem solving in many cases, is the fact that you're so adamant about your own side or one side that you don't see that whole perspective. So I think it's great that you're finding ways to just isolate one scenario, the benefits of one, then the other. I think that's an amazing strategy that, all of our listeners could put into place today. I mean, even with writing, for example, like what case study am I going to put in there? Like we just talked about before, right? So, I mean, thank you for sharing that. That's incredible. I mean, I'm almost wondering, I'm sure that you've gotten a lot of feedback from this book now. I'm curious to see, like, have you heard stories from readers who have put that into place, isolated two different sides, and give us an example, like, what have been the rewards of putting this book out there because you have that out now?
Yeah, certainly there are people who send emails or connect on LinkedIn or run into me in an airport randomly, who are very gracious about saying that these tools help them with a particular problem at work or help them shift their mindset about how they solve problems. I think what's very interesting is how often people will say it helped them in their relationship with their children. Because very often with teenagers, I'm told, I don't have any teenage children, but that it can get very adversarial and right and wrong and me versus you. And that the process and the tools and the mindsets of integrative thinking, trying to make your own thinking more explicit, genuine curiosity and empathy for other people, the belief that together you can create a better answer, that those mindsets can help shift difficult moments or difficult relationships with people in their lives. And so that's always really edifying for me to hear that people feel like it's improved some personal relationships in their life. But yeah, I'm fortunate enough to get people sharing some of those stories with me in lots of different contexts.
Exactly. Not only are you driving real change by allowing those problems to be solved, but you also are able to, feel that reward yourself and know that you worked on something that led to that positive change. If there's somebody out there right now who's listening and wondering, should I write my book? Should I get my ideas out there? I mean, this is a perfect example of why you should, because it's just an amazing benefit of having your book out there on the shelves, because you never know the type of feedback and, positive outcomes you're going to have from getting your book out. So yeah, thank you for that.
I guess for me, if it's useful to one person, then that makes it valuable, right? And you don't know who it's going to go to or how they're going to use it or any of that. But if it was useful to me, which it was, the hope would be that it would be useful to others. And so there's real meaning in that, right? It's about helping other people with whatever you've learned in your life. And whether that's 5 people or 25,000 people or 500,000 people, there's meaning in that.
Yeah, every little bit counts, right? Anything you could leave your impact on the world in a positive way, that's all you can do sometimes, and I love that you're able to do such an amazing thing. I'm also curious now, do you happen to have a copy of the book with you right now? There we go. Can you hold it up for everyone to see? I'm curious. Okay, so there it is right there, creating great choices. I like the way that the great is just circled right there, kind of like that's the decision, right? We're gonna be great. These choices are gonna be the right ones. I like that a lot. Because all of our listeners right now, if these tips have inspired you and you want to share this with your workplace, your friends, your family, I mean, it's right on Amazon and I'm sure bookshelves everywhere as well. And also, Jennifer, I'm curious to know, where can our listeners perhaps find more information about you and what you do, or perhaps if they're looking for consultations themselves, how can they reach out to you?
So I am on LinkedIn and on various different social media platforms. If you're interested in IDEO, come and check us out at ideo.com. It's ideo.com. And learn about design, innovation, creative problem solving in that context. So those would be the primary places, I think.
That's perfect. Okay, and we're going to have links to that right in the description of this video and this podcast. So everybody check that out because, I mean, anybody can benefit from problem solving steps, whether it's one tip that you learned today about, isolating both viewpoints or probably many others in the framework. We can all benefit from that. So check it out, everybody. And I guess, as we sort of start to wrap up today, Jennifer, I'm kind of curious, what else is on the horizon for you now? I mean, you're loving IDEO. Are you thinking about perhaps writing any other books about, maybe the difference between both companies and both types, or anything else that you have in mind on the radar this year?
I think when I have a little bit of time, which I don't right now, but I'm hoping I will, there is a book in my mind about this intersection of strategy and design. I think it's a really powerful additional tool to your creative problem solving toolkit. And so that is very much in my mind as something that I would like to do next. I just have to find the time and space to do it alongside my day job.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a book that you want to get out there, you always have to find the time to to write it. Like we mentioned earlier in this show, right? Just get your ideas out there on the page. I'm curious, you said in design, do you mean like creative design in terms of like artwork or perhaps another avenue?
So IDEO is a design firm in the sense that it began as an industrial design firm, so making products for companies. So famously, one of the first things we designed was the Apple mouse, the first mouse that was used with Apple computers, with the Macintosh, medical devices, that sort of thing. But what really made IDEO famous was the idea of design thinking, which is to say industrial designers, product designers, graphic designers, great designers of all types have a way of tackling problems that we can, even if we're not designers or artists, apply to lots of different kinds of problems. So the ability to begin with the user and deeply understand their needs, diverge to multiple different kinds of solutions, and then get very buildy, make prototypes of those answers, whether that's a digital prototype or a physical prototype or whatever way you can do it, and then really test and learn and get feedback and make those solutions better. So it's not dissimilar to what we talked about in terms of writing, which is think about what your audience is going to need in order to understand, write something bad and make it better. That actually is a design process, or very aligned with how we do our work at IDEO.
Understood. Yeah. I mean, honestly, one reason somebody might write a book is to fill a need that needs to be filled. And I think by, putting that out there into the world as well is something that a lot of us would benefit from because, I mean, for example, I wasn't even quite sure to begin with what that kind of thing would entail, but now that you've explained that more, it's something that can relate in many different industries, many different contexts. So, I mean, hey, Jennifer, if you ever want to put it out there and get it out, just go ahead and start writing. I mean, day jobs are very important, and they take up a lot of our time. And I actually wrote a blog post about this recently. At the end of the day, who wants to kind of sit down and do more work, right? But, it's never, I always like to advocate and say, get your book out there and start writing. And if you need somebody to help you along the way, at Authors on Mission, we have amazing angel writers like myself who we kind of do all the heavy work for you. It's kind of like a done for you service. If you have an idea, sometimes my clients, they just kind of voice message me there's some ideas while they're in the car on the way home from work, and then I'm able to kind of take it and help them get it out into the pages. And it just makes a big difference because they're able to have their authentic voice on the page while also not taking away from their day-to-day activities. And it's a great streamlined way to do it. So if you're ever interested in that kind of process, or any of our listeners too, I mean, Authors on Mission, we have amazing services tailored to whatever needs you might need to be filled. So something to keep in mind as well as you go about your day tomorrow, just to think about.
Thanks, Danielle.
Yeah. So as we start to wrap up today, I'm curious, do you have any last pieces of advice that we may want to leave our listeners off with today? Any type of moment and thought to hold on to as we close out?
I guess for me, the most important thing that I learned was truly there is no one right voice for a business book or one right way to write. I think that I write how I speak. It sounds like me, and that was very important to me. And so bad business writing sounds like someone trying to write business speak. I would encourage you at all costs to avoid that. Avoid the jargon, avoid the multi-syllabic words, avoid trying to sound smart, and just imagine you're telling something you care about to a person you care about, and use whatever words feel authentic and right and true to you. At least that works for me.
That I 100% agree with that. I tell my clients that all the time, like if your text is too full of jargon, who's going to relate to that? Who's going to read it, right? You're going to lose interest. So you need to have that human voice to connect with your readers. But yeah, I mean, just in itself, having your own voice and your own passion, just the way that you've been talking about IDEO, for example, it makes the readers also passionate, right? And so that kind of just adds more impact to the book too. So amazing tip there. Thank you for that. So yeah, I mean, as we start to wrap up today, I just want to thank you again for coming onto this podcast. I think that our listeners really got a lot of insight from this, whether it be for the writing process or just problem solving in general. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Same, really happy to do it. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Thank you again. And, to all of our listeners, also thank you for, spending the time today with us. We're joined today by Jennifer, and she's a partner at IDEO, co-author of Creating Great Choices. And, she spent years helping leaders move beyond either thinking or creating to help with solutions to complex problems. And through her work, she's developed all these amazing tools. So check out her book, check out her company. You're going to be able to find some amazing things on there. So without further ado, have an amazing evening, everybody. Think about how you're going to solve your own problems today based on all of our tips, and keep leading, keep writing, and keep inspiring. And that's all for today. Thank you. This is Danielle Hutchinson reminding you that somewhere, someone needs the book that only you can write. Visit authorsonmission.com to start your legacy. Until next time, keep leading, keep inspiring, and keep thinking in chapters. Have a great day.